He was already making the mistake before he even opened his eyes. His body was moving, rolling, pressing his hands against the ground, trying to stand. And every single motion was burning through the one resource he couldn't get back. Not water, not shelter, not fire. Heat. The temperature outside was minus 23 degrees Celsius. The wind made it feel like minus 38. Daniel Kowalski had been conscious for less than 40 seconds, and he was already losing the fight. If you've never had to think about surviving with nothing, no gear, no map, no signal, stay here, because what this man did in the next 18 hours is the reason he still has a life to talk about. And what he did in the first 4 minutes is the reason he almost didn't. Subscribe to this channel. Every week, real stories, real decisions, or real survival. Now, back to the ice. Daniel was 31 years old, an engineer from Tromsø in northern Norway, working a contract for a pipeline infrastructure company operating along the northern coast. He wasn't a mountaineer. He wasn't an explorer. He had grown up in Oslo, studied in Bergen, and the most extreme environment he had regularly navigated before this job was the commuter train during rush hour. He had been in the Arctic for 6 weeks. He knew it was cold. He knew it was dangerous in the abstract way that people know things they have read about but never felt. The way you know that drowning is bad without ever having water in your lungs. He had a job, he had a team, he had protocol. What he didn't have on the morning of the 14th of February was any of those things. The last thing he remembered clearly was the snowmobile. The engine sound changing, a high whine that shouldn't have been there, and then the world tilting sideways faster than he could process. The vehicle had gone down a slope he hadn't seen because the light was flat. Flat light in the Arctic is one of the most dangerous conditions a person can encounter. The sky and the snow become the same color. Shadows disappear. Depth perception collapses. A cliff edge looks identical to open ground. He had gone over a ridge doing approximately 40 kilometers per hour. The snowmobile was somewhere below him. He didn't know how far below. He didn't know if it was intact or buried. He didn't know if anyone had seen him go down. What he knew, when he finally stopped moving and lay still on the snow and made himself breathe, and was this: he was alive. He had a bruised shoulder, a cut above his left ear that had already frozen over in the cold, which was, in the brutal arithmetic of the Arctic, lucky because it meant he wasn't bleeding out. He had his work jacket, a mid-layer fleece, and thermal base layer pants. He had his boots. He had no gloves. They had been in the snowmobile's side compartment. He had no balaclava. He had no emergency kit. He had his hands, his brain, and whatever the tundra was willing to give him. He stood up. That was the mistake. In any other environment, standing up makes sense. You stand up, you assess, you move. That's the sequence a functioning human brain runs automatically when it perceives danger. Because in most environments, movement is survival. Movement gets you away from predators. Movement gets you toward shelter. Movement keeps you warm. In the Arctic, at minus 23, with no gloves and a compromised core temperature, movement without direction is death with extra steps. When Daniel stood up and started walking, fast, purposeful, heart hammering, his body responded the way it was designed to. Muscles fired, blood pumped to his extremities. He began to sweat lightly inside his jacket. This is where people die. Sweat is water. In sub-zero temperatures, wet fabric stops insulating. It conducts cold directly to the skin. The moment the exertion stopped, the moment he slowed down, sat down, ran out of will or ran out of ground, that sweat layer would become a refrigerant pressed against his body. His core temperature would drop. He would feel warm at first in a way that made no sense. A spreading warmth that wasn't warmth at all. That sensation has a name in hypothermia medicine. It's called paradoxical undressing. It's the body's final hallucination before it shuts down. So convincing that people in late-stage hypothermia have been found in the snow with their jackets removed, unable to understand why they felt so hot when they were freezing to death. Daniel didn't know any of this. He walked for 11 minutes before the fear became something worse than fear, before it became the particular silence inside a person who has just realized they genuinely don't know what to do. He stopped. The landscape was the same in every direction. This is not a metaphor. The Norwegian Arctic plateau in winter offers almost no visual references. No trees, no buildings, or no elevation that the flat light allowed him to read correctly. The sky was the color of old pewter, low and formless. The sun a pale suggestion somewhere behind 40 kilometers of cloud. The snow stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional dark smear of exposed rock. He had walked 11 minutes from where he woke up. He didn't know which direction. He turned around and the world looked identical. This is the moment, not the fall, not the cold, not the missing gloves. This moment, standing in the middle of a white void, breathing too fast, not knowing if forward and backward were even real concepts anymore. This is where Daniel Kowalski came closest to making the decision that would have ended him. He almost ran. The body's panic response in true disorientation is a desperate, an irrational urge to move fast in any direction because motion feels like agency and agency feels like survival. Experienced Arctic guides call it the spin. You turn, you pick a direction, you commit, and you run until you can't, which depletes your energy reserves, maximizes sweat production, and gets you exactly as lost as you were, except now you're exhausted and wet, and your window for doing anything about it has closed. Daniel's legs were already tensing, and then he heard his own breathing, not as an observation, as a sound. Loud, ragged, too fast, like someone else was standing right behind him. He heard it, and it stopped him the way a shout stops you in a quiet room. He stood there and listened to himself breathe for a long time. Later, when he tried to explain this to the rescue coordinator who debriefed him, he couldn't say how long. He thought maybe 3 minutes. It might have been 8. What he said was, "I just got tired of the sound. It was embarrassing. I sounded like a scared kid." He slowed his breathing down because he was embarrassed, and slowing his breathing down saved his life. The first thing that became clear once his nervous system dropped out of full alarm was that he was wet. Not soaked, but the back of his undershirt was damp against his skin. He unzipped his jacket, pulled the fleece away from his body, held it out and squeezed. Nothing dripped, but the fabric was heavy in a way it hadn't been before. He understood instinctively that this was bad. He didn't know the mechanism. He just knew, the way your body sometimes knows things before your mind catches up, that wet was wrong and that moving more would make it worse. He stopped moving. In survival training, this principle has a name. Stop, think, observe, plan. It's taught in wilderness first aid courses worldwide as the first response to disorientation, because the most dangerous thing a lost person can do is keep moving without information. Daniel had never taken a wilderness first aid course. What his body did in that moment wasn't trained. It was something older than training, the mammalian stillness that prey animals use when they don't know where the threat is coming from. Freeze, gather information, then act. He looked at the sky. The light was coming from a slightly brighter patch of cloud to his south-southwest. Not the sun. The sun wouldn't show itself clearly for months at this latitude and this time of year, but a diffuse brightening that told him which direction the light source was. He oriented himself. He looked at the ground. Snow, compressed and smooth in some places, looser and disturbed in others. And there, his own footprints, leading back in the direction he had come from. He could follow them. He could go back. He didn't know what he was going back to, but he knew it was something, and something was better than the white nothing in every other direction. He followed his own footprints. He walked slowly, deliberately. He was conscious of his breathing, of his pace, of keeping his exertion low enough that he wasn't generating new sweat. Every few minutes he would stop and listen. Not for rescue, he didn't expect rescue yet, but to regulate himself, to make sure the panicked breathing wasn't coming back. It took him 19 minutes to walk back what had taken 11 minutes before. He found the snowmobile. It was worse than he hoped, and better than he feared. The vehicle had gone over the ridge and slid approximately 40 meters down a 30-degree slope before coming to rest against a rock formation that had stopped it from continuing into the gully below. The windscreen was shattered. The front ski assembly was bent at a severe angle that made the machine unrideable. The kill switch had triggered on impact, and the key was somewhere under the snow, but the side compartments were intact. He opened the left compartment. An emergency flare, expired but potentially functional. Into a folded emergency blanket, the Mylar type, crinkled and thin, a short-handled ice axe used for route marking, a single chemical hand warmer. He opened the right compartment, his gloves, a half-liter thermos, a compact multi-tool, a box of waterproof matches with 16 remaining, a nylon tarp rolled tight, approximately 2 meters by 1.5. He stood there and looked at these objects for a moment. Then he picked up the chemical hand warmer and shook it for 30 seconds and held it in his right hand, which was beginning to lose fine motor control from the cold, and felt the heat spread through his palm. He didn't feel relief. What he felt, he said later, was something more like focus, the kind that comes not from certainty, but from having something specific to do. The first priority was not fire. The first priority was not shelter. The first priority was the wet underlayer against his skin. He took off his jacket, took off his fleece, peeled the thermal base layer shirt over his head, and stood in the Arctic air in nothing above the waist for approximately 90 seconds while he wrung the shirt out, shook it hard, held it against the engine cavity of the snowmobile, still faintly warm from the engine's last run, and then put it back on. The fabric was cool, not warm, but it was no longer holding water against his skin. 90 seconds of exposure above the waist. The cold hit him like something physical. His chest tightened. His skin went from sensation to a dull, bright ache almost immediately. He put the fleece back on, put the jacket back on, wrapped the Mylar emergency blanket over everything, tucking it at the waist to trap air. He was not warm, but he had stopped the process that would have made him cold in a way he couldn't come back from. This is the piece of Arctic survival that most people get backwards. They think the goal is to generate heat. It isn't. The body generates heat constantly. Approximately 80 watts at rest, the output of a single incandescent bulb, enough to keep you alive through extraordinary cold if you stop leaking it into the environment. The management of existing heat is the entire game. Wet fabric destroys the insulating air pockets in clothing and conducts cold directly to the skin. Dry, layered fabric preserves them. The difference between dying and not dying, in many Arctic survival cases, comes down to whether or not a person understood this before they needed to. Or Daniel didn't understand it. He felt it, and feeling it was enough. He needed shelter before dark. The functional daylight at this latitude in February lasted perhaps 5 hours, and from the angle of the diffuse glow through the clouds, he was past the midpoint. The rock formation that had stopped the snowmobile gave him his starting point. 2 large boulders, each roughly chest height, set at an angle that created a natural windbreak. The snow on the leeward side was softer and deeper, undisturbed. He used the ice axe to carve into that snow, not quickly, steadily with controlled effort, stopping whenever his breathing accelerated, letting himself cool before starting again. He dug a horizontal cavity approximately 1 meter deep, half a meter tall, wide enough for his shoulders. This took 40 minutes. And a snow cavity is one of the most effective emergency shelters available in an Arctic environment. Not despite the snow, but because of it. Snow's thermal conductivity is dramatically lower than still air and exponentially lower than moving air. The temperature inside a snow shelter will stabilize at approximately -5 to -10 Celsius, regardless of exterior conditions. This is cold, but it is survivably cold. -23 with wind chill is not. He lined the floor with a nylon tarp, folded double. Ground contact is one of the fastest ways to lose core heat. The earth pulls warmth away by conduction at a rate that exposed flesh cannot sustain for long. The tarp wasn't a sleeping pad, but it was a barrier, and a barrier was better than nothing. He placed the Mylar blanket over the tarp. He crawled in, feet first, went and pulled the remaining flap of the tarp over himself as far as it would reach. He was too long for the cavity. His feet pressed the back wall, and his shoulders nearly filled the entrance. He tucked his gloved hands against his chest. He put the hand warmer between his palms. He lay in the dark and waited. The thermos contained coffee. It was no longer hot, barely warm, the temperature of a sun-warmed stone in late afternoon. But it was liquid, and it was not frozen, and he drank half of it slowly over the first hour. Rationed the second half for later. Hydration matters more in the cold than most people expect. The body's thirst signal is suppressed at low temperatures. a response called cold-induced diuresis, where the body shunts blood away from the extremities and the kidneys increase output, which means you lose fluid faster than you feel thirsty. Dehydration in the cold accelerates the drop in core temperature. It thickens the blood. It slows cognition. The warm liquid Daniel was drinking was doing more than hydrating him. It was buying him clarity. The wind was audible through the snow above his head. A steady low pressure, punctuated by gusts. He felt as slight shifts in air pressure inside the cavity. But the wind itself wasn't reaching him. The temperature stabilized. He stopped shivering, which was not relief. Stopped shivering can mean either that you have warmed up or that your body has given up trying. He forced himself to test his fingers periodically. They moved. He tensed and released his feet in a slow rhythm, keeping the circulation going. He did not allow himself to sleep. So he stayed there for 3 hours, and then he heard it. A mechanical sound, distant at first, rising and falling with the wind, easy to mistake for the wind itself. But it had a regularity that wind noise doesn't have. A rhythm. He lay still and tracked it with his ears. Closer, then angling away, then closer again. A snowmobile. He did not move immediately. He processed it. The sound was moving. He had one expired flare and 16 matches. And if he used the flare while the snowmobile was moving away, it was gone. If he waited too long, the geometry of visibility would close, and no flare would matter. He made the calculation in 4 seconds. He pulled himself out of the shelter. The cold hit him like a wall. He had almost forgotten what full exposure felt like. He stood upright, oriented toward the sound. Sharin struck the first match. It failed. He cupped his hands or struck the second, and the flare caught. Red chemical light, intense and startling against the gray plateau, climbing it to the sky in a widening arc. He held it at arm's length and turned slowly, a full arc, making himself a point of color against the white. The snowmobile sound changed direction. 2 men from the pipeline company's safety team. They had been running the search grid for 4 hours. By chance or by the logic of his own footprints pulling him toward familiar terrain, Daniel had ended up near the edge of the primary search corridor. They found him standing in the snow with a dying flare in his right hand. Emergency blanket over his jacket, face expressionless, feet steady. They expected someone in crisis. As they had seen what hypothermia does to people, the confusion, the slurring, the strange calm that precedes collapse. They were prepared for something difficult. He said, "I need to get warm, and someone should check my feet." The medical team at base camp found mild frost nip on 2 toes of his left foot. Not frostbite, not permanent damage. 72 hours and they would be fine. He drank broth. He let them check him. He answered their questions. When the safety coordinator asked what had kept him focused out there, what the thing was that had made the difference, Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I stopped." Most of it was just that. I stopped. The coordinator wrote it down. He went back to work 11 days later. Same contract, same ice. And he had requested updated cold weather survival training before returning to fieldwork. And he brought his own gloves, a backup pair, kept inside his jacket rather than the snowmobile compartment. He didn't talk about those 18 hours much, not because the experience had broken something in him that he was trying to protect, though it had settled into him in ways he was still finding months later, but because the thing he kept coming back to when he tried to explain it was too simple to sound like much. He had stopped moving when everything in him said to run. That was it. 2 toes that ache when the temperature drops fast. That's what he kept from the ice. That's all. If you found yourself out there, what's the one decision you would have made differently? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story earned it, you know what to do.